Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Delfina Belli. I'm a 21-year-old student in international economic policy at Sciences Po University here in Paris. And as a young woman, I'm extremely passionate about AI ethics and about the role that AI can play in bridging the gender gap without exacerbating pre-existing inequalities. And this is why I'm extremely happy and honored to be introducing and moderating today's panel on the development of AI principles. And today with me, we have Angel Gurria, Secretary General of the OECD, Dr. Salim bin Mohammed Al-Malik, Director General of ISESCO, Her Excellency Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy of the African Union, Dr. Marc-Antoine Dillac, who is Coordinator and Director of the Montreal Declaration for Responsible Development of AI, and Dr. Claire Nappel, who is Senior Director of the IEEE. So I want to start by thanking UNESCO for hosting this conversation and for creating, once again, the possibility for interaction among different organizations, perspectives, and generations on a topic that has become more and more central in today's AI debate. I also want to take this time to thank UNESCO's and commend UNESCO's focus on harnessing the positive impact of artificial intelligence for achieving the 2030 SDGs, and also on mitigating its possible risks by addressing issues such as bias, inequalities, and human rights. More specifically, and dearest to me, is the topic of AI as an enabler of gender equality. So, as we know, AI is as good as the data we feed it. So, how can we expect unbiased outputs if the data we have is still rooted in a society which discriminates against women and minorities? And how do we fix this bias if only 30% of our decision makers are women? In the European Union, this is the data, and I'm Italian, and in my country, only 16% of decision makers are women, and only 14% are ICT experts. Unfortunately, this is the board globally, and with few virtuous exceptions, and I think we cannot fully harness the potential of artificial intelligence if only one gender and half of the world's population is both developing and accessing this technology. So UNESCO has been very vocal on the role that women can and should play in AI, and leveraging this ongoing and cross-cutting transformation through ethical guidelines, through capacity building in AI literacy, and to access to information is key not only to address this gender bias in algorithms, but also to empower women globally. In this way, women in developed and developing countries can address local challenges and can also develop scalable solutions. So, keeping all of this in mind, we've seen many sets of ethical principles being developed by the private sector, by academia, technical community, international and regional organizations, some at this very table. And this panel has gathered these stakeholders in order to discuss commonalities and priorities in light of the upcoming consideration of UNESCO's General Conference, whether to develop a standard-setting instrument on the ethics of AI over the next 2 years. So without further ado, I want to start off this panel with asking a question to all of our panelists, starting with Dr. Salim bin Mohammed Al-Malik. And please keep your answers under the minute if possible. From your perspective, why is it important to develop standard-setting principles in the field of AI? And what is the role of UNESCO in this field?
Artificial intelligence is a phenomenon that's witnessing a large and rapid growth, and it has strong potential to help the nation in achieving sustainable development goals, but at the same time it can pose a threat to human rights, and if left unattended. So it becomes increasingly important to develop a standard-setting principle to preserve and protect the human rights in the short, medium, and long term. So for UNESCO, I think the main role is to establish guiding ethical norms and standards for an efficient and rightful humanitarian use of artificial intelligence at all.
Thank you. And the same question for Mr. Gouria.
Last year I was in the the World Mobile Congress in Barcelona, and before me was the Deputy Director General of UNESCO, and before me also was the Commissioner of the EU about the virtual, digital, and so I was ready to announce to the world that we were going to launch the principles of artificial intelligence. So the guy in front of me, Deputy DG of UNESCO, said, and let me tell you, we are now working on the development of the principles of artificial intelligence. They said, oh, well, there goes my thunder, you know. And then the guy from the European Union, his turn to speak, he said, and let me tell you, the European Union is developing principles of artificial intelligence in order to, I say, oh my God, So now what do I say? And so when my turn to speak came, he said, don't worry, I'm also here to tell you that the OECD is developing principles, but don't worry about the fact that we all are developing principles. And the reason is very simple. We are learning. It's a learning curve for all our organizations, for all our institutions. We're not competing with each other. We're all trying to learn in our respective areas. Now, let me tell you that the OECD actually did deliver the artificial intelligence principles. And not only that, but that our G20 Sherpa, Gabriela Ramos here with me, actually took it to the G20 and sold it to the G20, and then the G20 adopted it, and they're not even paying any intellectual property rights, and they just took it, and now the G20 has now it means we got 3 billion more clients right now, which was good. Because we got the Chinese, and we got the Indians, and we got the Brazilians, and we got, which is good. So we got a lot more public, but then the whole question is more important that we are starting. We are actually moving. We are learning, and this is we have to do together. We have to do it by getting synergies, by learning from what is going on at UNESCO, at the European Union, but also in what happened at the OECD, but also because the G20, all are going to be working on this, and all have something to teach us, all have something to share with us, and this is what this meeting is all about today.
Thank you very much. Same question to Dr. Abu Zaid.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Secretary General, I have an announcement to make.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Huh?
No, but let me start by saying that I'm thrilled to be here today, and I'm thrilled that the larger part of the audience are young people. Just for history, 20 years ago, I applied to the UNESCO and was not accepted. Thank God. And this is where I am today. So for young people around, in the room, please do not take a rejection as a bad thing. It may be the best thing that ever happened to you. So what are we doing here today? I'm here just to tell you that I am thrilled to be in Africa this time. These are the times where technology is providing for the African continent, by the African continent, solutions that never we expected before, and solutions that we never knew will be coming, but thanks to this technology, they are now available. And it's happening because and thanks to our young people. Now, AI is taking the continent by storm. It's the next big thing in the continent after mobile money and drones. Now, why are we here? Because we want to make sure that we have shared values You have shared principles, that we are working together across the continent, but also the continent with the rest of the world in a coordinated, harmonized way. And that's why we are here, the role of UNESCO, but not just the UNESCO, all the organizations here present and much more out there. We need to work together in an approach that takes into account everyone's voice, but also everyone's concern, and make sure that while we are progressing and innovating and creating, that we are also making sure that we are people-centered, rights-centered, and that we provide also the kind of security and protection for everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. I've been asked to speak in French, so I'm going to deliver my comments in French.
When I started working in 2017 on the draft declarations, there were 2 declarations regarding AI ethics, Asimov and Siloma. And I'm proud to say that we drafted a declaration with ethical principles 6 months ahead of the OECD. And here, I fully agree with what Angel Gurria was saying. There are a great number of declarations, and that's rather a good thing. And these declarations all say more or less the same thing. And that goes to show that we're speaking the same language, that we're heading in the same direction, and that we'll be able to agree on reforms which are necessary in order to share the benefits of AI. We are all speaking in relatively abstract terms, but everybody within their own area and organization, UNESCO for education, science and culture, OECD for economic development and development amongst nations, the UN, of course, each and every one of us in our own area are putting forward proposals which tend to agree with each other.
Okay, thank you. If we are about when this all started, I joined the IEEE in 2017. The reason why I joined IEEE was because of the ethics in AI. So I have a pretty clear benchmark when we started with ethics. I'm very pleased to be here, and very often when I'm asked why ethics and why principles, I very much like to make the comparison between what happens now and maybe 100 years ago when we entered the age of mobility, which very much changed our society as well. And you can imagine there, as you maybe know, a street where we had different cars and different electric cars, cable cars, carriages, passengers moving in different directions. And I think this is where we are now. We just heard what's happening in Africa. We hear it everywhere. We have AI solutions at different maturity levels which are deployed and others which are more problematic. What we needed to do in the mobility era was to also agree on a principle. We had to agree, for instance, that safety is more important than speed. So I think it's important to start from principles, and what is important right now is to set the social norms, just as for mobility, also for AI. And a lot of it is local, as was just mentioned, but AI is global. So that's why I think that UNESCO, as a global organization, has an important role to play, because something like a driver's license is universal.
Thank you all very much for your inputs. We're going to start a second round of questions, individuals this time, and we're going to start with Dr. Malik. Currently, ISESCO is reinforcing cooperation with UNESCO in shared areas of interest, notably artificial intelligence. Can you tell us more about how ISESCO is harnessing AI to meet the SDGs in its field of competence, and how, from your perspective, the comparative advantage of working with UNESCO in this field?
Thank you. I was sitting beside His Excellency, the Secretary General, then he asked me, who is ISESCO? And I said that we are the Islamic organization for education, science, and culture. We basically are the UNESCO of the Islamic world. And we are opening up, and we are saying to all other members, welcome to be an observer as a member with UNESCO. We're not going to reinvent the wheel and develop new principles and standards for artificial intelligence, but I assure you that we will adopt your guidelines based on what you said and what the UNESCO have done. The Islamic world is a consumer of artificial intelligence, but unfortunately with a limited understanding. And this is really have made it a little bit difficult that if we do not follow the artificial intelligence, the Islamic world is going to be left behind. And that's really a serious matter. So within the new vision of our organization, we're promoting artificial intelligence, and we are having it as a top priority. So our main goal is to build a vibrant artificial intelligence ecosystem within the objective to help those that are most needed. So artificial intelligence can solve social and economic issues if it is rightly used and utilized. So it requires appropriate policies and regulation, and we will follow, we will adopt what UNESCO and what OECD have done, and we will share also with all other organizations. So UNESCO currently is focusing to reduce the existing digital gap between their member state countries and the developed world. So supporting our member state in effective adoption of AI and building a better synergy among all our members. So I think with the help of UNESCO, with the help of OECD, that we will be signing an agreement today with the UNESCO, and we will be signing another agreement with OECD in the coming 2 months based on a project. And one of these projects is artificial intelligence that will help really our member state countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Mr. Gurria. So we've seen the OECD has recently adopted its AI principles, and we want to ask you, how do they promote a human-centered approach, and how do they take into account the perspective and needs of youth?
If it's not human-centered, it's not worth very much. It has to be human-centered. And it has to be addressed to the young, who are the ones who understand it better, can operate it better, can digest it better, and they are the ones whose future depends on the harnessing of the power of artificial intelligence, and at the same time on fighting the downside of artificial intelligence. The upside is it can help us to develop practically everything we do, whether it's agriculture, whether it's science and technology, but also health or education, anything we do, taxes, we do it. We can do it faster, we can do it better, more thoroughly, in real time, and all the advantages that you want. The downside is that we believe 14% of the workforce of today are going to be displaced by technology in the next 10 to 15 years, and 1/3 additional to the 14%, 1/3 are going to be disrupted somehow in their work spaces, in their workplaces. And that means that practically half of the workforce is not prepared today to deal with digital, with high technology, and even less so with a very developed expression of digital and high technology, which is, of course, artificial intelligence. Now, actually, we set out 5 values-based principles in the G20 principles, which were, as I said, taken from the OECD AI. But one of them is human-centered values and fairness, and that's the key one. I remember one of our member countries said, oh yes, you can deal with artificial intelligence, but please don't deal with the ethics part. And I said, what? What are you talking about? You know, if we don't deal with the ethics, we can't even get started in terms of looking at the artificial intelligence. So it has to be human-centered, it has to be, and the approach has to be human-centered, but it also has to be dealt with. Now, when you say youth, I would say, yes, all the young people, but particularly children these days, let's focus on how to protect them, how to promote them, but also how to protect them as we develop the potential of AI.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Dr. Abu Zaid. In Agenda 2063 of the African Union, the need to develop and harness technology for sustainable development is underlined. How, in your opinion, can the development of standards and principles in the field of AI ensure that technology is harnessed to meet the SDGs? And what is the AU doing in this field?
Thank you very much, Delfina. And as you rightly said, I mean, AI, and I also highlighted this earlier on, AI and new technologies are bringing to the continent a new hope. And I'm sure you all heard, I mean, when we say that the 21st century is promising to be Africa's century. And thanks to this innovation, creativity, solutions that are brought and created on the continent, thanks to the technology, and especially AI. If you go across the continent now, you'll find it applied to agriculture, you'll find it applied to health, you'll find it applied to even public services, and so on and so forth. While we're having this, we also need to make sure, as highlighted several times before, that there is our businesses, our society, our individuals, we are all protected from downside. But our priority is to make sure that ideas thrive, technology thrives, because this is where the hope is coming to the continent. At the African Union, we have, to avoid the situation that you just mentioned, maybe in the developed world and other parts of the world, at the African Union, and that's the union of all African countries, all 55 of them, all our countries have adopted some kind of technology, policy, strategy on digital economy or AI and so on and so forth. We want to make sure that we move together, but in a coordinated manner. That's why we're having a continental digital transformation agenda, and we have a chapter on innovative technology, especially AI, to make sure that as a continent, we have the same standards, the same principles that as mentioned, they are human rights based, human-centered, to move together into that space. For Africa, it's much more important, I would say, even than other parts of the world, because we are the youngest continent. 70% of our population are young people, so we cannot afford to dismiss that and do something that is in the way, it's not business as usual. We understand that. It comes, of course, with certain challenges, and maybe I will have the time later on to talk about some of these challenges, but we want to make sure that our digital transformation approach and strategy on the continent is done minding the different levels of development, minding the different concerns and the different opportunities that are present on the continent, and that is done under the African Union, which is for those who don't know, we are the organization, the political organization that assembles the whole of the continent and unite the whole of continent for an integrated Africa, and we speak as one continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This next question is for Professor Diak. The Montreal Declaration of Responsible Development of AI was one of the first civil society initiatives to develop a set of ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence and brought together different stakeholder groups, including youth, to jointly elaborate both principles and recommendations for implementation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of elaboration of the declaration and its impact?
Yes, sure. So the Montreal Declaration is basically a crowdsourced ethical framework for the development of AI. It relies on grassroots expertise and citizen participation. The idea behind the declaration is very simple. The deployment of AI raises serious political, social, economical, and ethical dilemmas. And in a diverse, in a pluralistic society like Canada, but it's the case for almost all countries in this, on this earth, well, the experts, the ethicists, do not have the competence and the mandate to settle those dilemmas, resolve the issues, but to clarify the debates, to help people articulate and voice their opinions and make decisions on a reasonable basis. Of course, we want to avoid any irrational and unreasonable outcome from this, coming from this process. And this is why we have done the deliberatory or the participatory process of the Montreal Declaration. So we have set a prospective approach based on scenarios, allowing people to anticipate upcoming issues with the development of AI. So in the near future, we set the scenarios in 2025. And we launched the participatory process in early 2018. We've organized a dozen half-day workshops in public libraries in Montreal, in Quebec City, and in Laval, and also, well, many other public events, but also 3 full-day workshops in Montreal, Quebec, and Paris. So in total, we've reached more than 500 people in face-to-face workshops, and we've also conducted an online deliberation, so reaching more people than in face-to-face workshops. This is mainly the process of the Montreal Declaration.
Thank you very much. This question is for Dr. Neppel. Can you tell us about IEEE's work on ethically aligned autonomous design and standard setting in the field of AI, and the relationship between these standards in the engineering community and standard setting in this field at regional and international level?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, IEEE is an engineering association. So we are the world's largest association of engineers. We are represented in 190 countries, so quite global. And one thing that unites us is the motto about advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. And AI came up 4 years ago as really one of the challenges that we have. Also, us as the engineering community, we have a responsibility on how we design systems for society. So this is how this initiative of ethically aligned design started. It basically gathered the technologies, so our associations, together with ethicists, philosophers, policymakers, and so on. And what we had through 3 versions of this ethically aligned design are issues and recommendations. Some of them for us, the engineering community, and a lot of them for the policymakers. So we work together with the OECD, with the UN, with the European Commission, and continue to work with them, actually. But beyond principles, it was very important for us, since we are engineers, to move to practice. So I think that this tagline, moving from principles to practice, is also something which started with Ethically Aligned Design, the first edition. And one way to move to practice is through standards. Standards is basically the way to show how you can achieve a principle. So for instance, if we're talking about transparency, what does it mean? How you define transparency? So we are now working on more than 13 or 14 ethical standards, and this complements a lot of technical standards that we are working. But it's not enough only about saying how to achieve transparency. How do you actually measure if somebody achieved a certain level of transparency? So this is where we started also a certification program, which is about proving that an organization who commits to certain requirements actually fulfills those requirements. And those 3 that we are working on right now is on accountability, transparency, and algorithmic bias. It's together with public administration, it's together with industry, and we're working together. Basically, what's important maybe in this setting is, of course, to see we are an engineering association, so normally not too many women, but for ethically aligned design, we have 40% women. So this shows that it is a topic which actually interests a lot of people, including women and youth. So.
Thank you very much. We're going to start our second round of questions now. So we're starting a round again. So this question is for Dr. Al-Malik. At ISESCO, you work across several sectors, and AI is a transversal and disruptive technology which touches education, culture, media and communication, and sciences. So how, from ISESCO point of view, can standard setting be ensured that is at once transversal and comprehensive in light of the multiple areas of work of organizations such as yours?
When I have a problem with my iPhone and don't know what to do, I always go back and ask my child, who's 15 years, to solve the issue that I cannot know. Now imagine artificial intelligence is coming. And we, at our age, how are we going to really solve the issue of artificial intelligence when we have those young children who are very bright? And if you give this iPhone now to somebody who's in Benin or Mozambique or Canada or United States, they both will share the information and they can understand. So the world is becoming very close to each other and children are communicating. So based on this, we have decided at the ISESCO to establish a strategy foresight center. And that center will support us for the future need and building our strategy in our member state. And we think that this strategic foresight center is going to be the future of our understanding of the world, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence. So we are planning to support our member state in this regard by building but by adopting and customizing those principles that OECD and World Bank and ISESCO have done with regard to artificial intelligence and customized to our needs within our member state countries. In addition to this, we are launching in a forum next year on artificial intelligence, and we really would like to, we are organizing this grand forum on the artificial intelligence on the third quarter of 2020, and we would love to have OECD, ISESCO, IEEE, and all other organizations to join us to build really a future, not for just only for the ISESCO member state, but for the global artificial intelligence needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This next question is for Mr. Gurria. So we often talk about the importance of a multi-stakeholder approach in shaping the policies for AI, but how do we do this in practice and achieve concrete policy outcomes?
The multi-stakeholder approach is the only way. It's not a way. And that's precisely because AI cuts throughout every single one of the disciplines that we know. Now, even to develop our own principles, we went to a group of 50 stakeholders from all the areas. We had UNESCO, of course, the European Commission, the IEEE. You know, you were there, you were helping. You were at the African Union. So everybody around the table was helping. At the same time, we also, I was going to announce with great thunder that we were creating the OECD Artificial Intelligence Policy Observatory, but Mr. Moez Chakchuk just announced that they are creating one here at UNESCO. So again, don't worry too much. It's the same thing. We'll create observatories all over the place. Now, he has said he doesn't call it the observatory, thank God. He calls it the ISESCO Foresight Center, okay? Yes. So we'll take a look, but again, the question is, you have to consult with a number of stakeholders, not only those that develop the actual algorithms or the mechanisms and the, just think about what this is, about. It's about machines learning from each other and at the same time being more capable simply because of the capacity that we, the humans, have built in them to deal with a faster, a better, deeper way with information. Now, there are a number of things that artificial intelligence is starting to learn to do, but again, basically they are trying to replicate what we do better. Hopefully we will continue to do better. But without a multi-stakeholder approach, we simply will not continue making progress. Now, let me just finish by saying, well, again, Gabriela took our principles to not only the G20, where they took them, but to the G7, the more recent G7. And in the G7, there was France and there was Canada. And then, now we had worked with Canada, with Montreal. Montreal is like a hub of artificial intelligence. Very distinguished place. We signed a memorandum of understanding with Laval University in order to work with them. You were there present. But the whole thing, or the importance of this is that Justin Trudeau said, okay, we will have 2 hubs, one in Montreal and one in Paris, and the support institution will be the OECD. Of course, both France and Canada are members of the OECD. So again, you're looking at already not only multi-stakeholders with an S, not just for the technology, but even because here 2 leaders are not saying, I will have it all, or the other will have it all. Basically, both recognize that every one of them can develop fully, and there we will exchange notes. We will be looking at the possibilities. So this is a very practical example of the multi-stakeholder approach. And I would say that geographically, I would say that socially, throughout you know, the different age structures, but also to the different sectors of industry, the different segments, like, for example, education or health or skills, etc. Only way to go is multi-stakeholder.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Dr. Abu Zaid. In developing principles and standards in the field of AI, it is important not to widen the existing digital divide between the global north and the global south. How, in your opinion, can the development of principles and standards ensure that this divide is not only overcome, but that the African continent is empowered to be creators and not only consumers of artificial intelligence? So what are some principles in this regard that should be centralized?
Thank you, Delphine. I think this panel is already dividing the north and the south, because I'm probably the only one from the south. So I encourage you that in the future
I'm Mexican.
that we have more people. Okay, next time. So, and let me also say that I'm extremely proud of the developments happening on the continent, I mean, our continent, Africa, when it comes to gender. Remember, I mean, we are beating even our own records in terms of women representation in government and in parliament. And as African Union, we are the only international organization which instituted the perfect parity. So by law, it's 50-50. And also by law, 35% have to be young people. And we have the special envoy and the body of the youth envoy who oversee and work together with us. So both women and young people are part of our governing, part of us, and also governing the work that we do. So we're really very proud of Africa in that sense. Nevertheless, divide still persists. And divide is not only gender on the continent. Our divide is also urban-rural. Remember, I'm saying about all these great things happening on the continent, but only 30% of the Africans are connected to the internet, let alone in the high-speed internet. So the countries that I know, littoral or peripheral countries on the ocean, the ones who are landlocked, the very high cost of the access to technology, and especially the internet, we are paying 4 times, sometimes even 10 times more to access the internet than in the developed world. So it's not just about gender. We could be, if we're not careful, we could be very much discriminated against and missing out this great opportunity. But we are determined not to. So what are we doing? In terms of infrastructure, we are extending the necessary infrastructure, regional and cross-continental, to make sure that at least the connectivity is there. The upskilling of people. I mentioned the digital transformation strategy, and the digital transformation strategy, even though it is done at the highest level and is going to the heads of states to adopt, it has been one of the most participatory exercises we ever conducted in the African Union and for the continent. Private sector is there. All IFIs is there. Regional organizations are there. Civil society, young people, gender, and same thing, especially for AI, because we have a special task force on AI, and we would like very much that all organizations here present, especially UNESCO, ISESCO, and of course ECD and others, join forces, because there is no way that any organization can do this on its own. It's useless and pointless. This is one. Two, we have to recognize that we all have some kind of work to do and mandate, and we need to devise the work among ourselves to make sure, again, as I said earlier, that we move together and that we coordinate. However, at the end of the day, it has to be one approach for Africa, speaking for Africa, by Africa, for Africans. So it does not help that each and every organization, speaks for Africa. It doesn't work. We're not going to do that anymore for ourselves, or on the contrary, we are inviting everyone to work with us towards that end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Professor Diak. What, in your experience, or lessons learned from the multi-stakeholders consultation of the declaration, and particularly possible challenges in translating the principles and recommendations into practice? As we move forward towards a truly global standard-setting process, what needs to be done at scale to ensure civic participation?
Merci. I'm switching back to French.
Thank you very much. I have just 1 minute, so I will answer just one of the questions that you asked, but I will echo what was said before. What is it that I learned from the Montreal Declaration and the Montreal process? Well, you have people who are skeptical, They say, well, people have no time nor any interest nor any knowledge to be able to participate in such participatory processes. It's pointless to ask them for their opinion. You're not going to ever have them on board. What I learned getting up in the morning to organize the participatory workshops is that, in fact, when you give the floor to people, when you let them express their ideas, they do it, and they do it with pleasure. But there's one thing that you have to understand. It is that if you wait for people to come to you, it just is not going to work. If you wait for, say you have organized something in the center of Paris, if you wait for people who live in the suburbs, in underprivileged areas to come forward and participate, it just won't work. So the lesson to be drawn from this is that you have to go to these areas yourself, to these underprivileged areas, to areas where access is more difficult. And this is really what I learned from the process. I would like to say just one thing on Africa. Yes, it is important for everyone to have his or her own voice, and you should not have the global north speaking for the global south. But I think what is essential is that we cooperate. We should not ignore each other. We should really cooperate, work together. And this is one of the reasons with the Future Society and the Observatory on the impact of AI in Quebec. This is the reason why together we organized an initiative which is called the AI Civic Forum. And the AI Civic Forum is based on the idea that everyone should participate. But in order to participate, we're going to go to these people. We're going to go to these people on all 5 continents. So as to deploy the UNESCO process, to support the UNESCO process so that we keep in mind the universal, what really unites us, and also the local development. So we're going to go to Mexico. We already have some contacts over there, and we have contacts in various places. But we're going to go to various countries in Africa, because Africa is not just one continent. It's lots and lots of different countries with each their individual culture, and it's a continent as well. But this is what I wanted to stress at this point. Thank you. Thank you very much.
General of ESASCO had to leave for a ministerial meeting, but we're continuing with the last question to Dr. Clara Neppel. In order to address the challenge of translated principle into practice, as you said, the IEEE has recently been focusing on developing capacity building tool in the field of AI literacy. What, from your perspective, is the link between standard setting in AI literacy, particularly as it concerns empowering youth, women, and the Global South?
Thank you. I would like to highlight only two initiatives. One is actually also a multi-stakeholder collaboration. We started last year together with the OECD and the DQ Institute, a coalition on digital intelligence. And I very much agree with the mission of this initiative, namely that it is the age of DQ. After IQ, EQ, when we moved as a humanity from labor, physical labor, to mental activities and services, we now need DQ in the age of AI, in the age of fourth industrial revolution. And there are already a lot of initiatives, just as you mentioned. And it's very important to focus also on local needs. However, there are certain things where you need collaboration. Again, you need a common language. Because do we all agree what it means to be a data scientist? Or what is a cybersecurity expert? So our role in this initiative is about setting the common language and understanding on digital literacy, on digital skills, so that to build those capacity and to agree on what is needed to achieve to those skills which are needed. I would also like to stress one thing before ending, namely that it's important to design systems which incorporates the needs for every stakeholder groups. Youth, you just mentioned, 1/3 of the internet users are below 18 years old. However, I can tell you that the systems are by far not designed to take into account the needs and the rights of those children. So one of the other initiatives that we are also embarking on is to work with the Five Rights Foundation to incorporate the needs of the youth, age-appropriate design to take it into account for technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As we've run out of time, I'll be very brief. So I want to thank all the panelists here today. And I also want to thank UNESCO once again, in particular Sasha Rubel, and also a huge thank to my professor, Nico Mihail, without whom I wouldn't be here and be so passionate about this topic. And thank you all for being here and listening.
Thank you, Delphina.
Thank you very much, Delphina, and to all of our panelists. Wait, the side event is not over. We have a second panel coming up. We've heard a lot about what is needed in order to develop ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence. Now we are going to talk about what is needed to translate these principles into practice. And so I would like to invite, while we will play a short video, Iman Bello, who will moderate the second panel from principles to practice, as well as the panelists of the second panel to come on stage. Thank you very much.
Je pense à cerveau. Je pense à la mémoire et je pense aux neurones.
My first three words will be Africa, the other one will be intelligent, and woman.
Données, apprentissage, modèle de décision fondé sur les données.
Ce qui me vient à l'esprit, c'est performance et humanité. À la fois cette envie d'être les meilleurs, mais avec du sens.
I think about automation, I think about scalability, and I think about dynamism.
Les premiers mots qui me viennent à l'esprit, c'est bien sûr innovation, mais ensuite c'est biais et c'est données personnelles, vie privée.
Progrès, opportunité, humanité, maîtrise, transparence.
So if everybody could please take their seats, we will start the second panel, From Principles to Practice, that will be moderated by Iman Bello. Please, could everyone, I'm very excited to see that artificial intelligence inspires such passionate conversation, but we will definitely have more time at the end. Please take your seats so we can start the second panel. And now I hand over to Iman Bello.
Thank you, Sasha. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Iman Bello. I'm a lecturer on the ethics and politics of AI systems here at Sciences Po, and I'm also a legal consultant on all technology-related matters in a law firm here in Paris. It's my honor to be here with all of you today and to moderate this panel on how we can move from principles to practice when it comes to the development and deployment of ethical AI systems. With me today, we have the honor to have Nicolas Miai, co-founder and president of the Future Society, Dr. Amandeep Singh Gill, former executive director of the United Nations High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, Adriana Bora, AI policy researcher and project manager at Global Data Commons, Dr. Peter Paul Verbeek, chair of the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, COMEST, Dr. Eva-Marie Müller-Stiller, chief data scientist and leader of the Center of Excellence for Data Science at IBM MEA. Before giving the floor to the panelists, I wanted to quickly introduce the subject. Studies have shown that AI systems such as facial recognition or object recognition systems can be biased. There's the well-known examples of systems mislabeling black students as gorillas, hence not only not recognizing them as human beings, but also mislabeling them as animals. Another study showed that the same category of objects is only recognized when the photo is taken in a country from the global north. So apparently, a soap is recognized as being a soap when the picture is from the global north, and when the picture is from the global south, the soap can be labeled as being cheese. So there's a multitude of reasons behind AI biases, but it's important to keep in mind that the lack of available local data contributes to AI systems mislabeling humans or objects. So when moving from principles to practice, it's clear that many challenges arise. In trying to tackle those challenges, I'm very happy to be here at UNESCO today, since UNESCO aims to strengthen the capacity of its member state, but also of society, in key areas that are impacted by and co-shape the development of AI systems, namely education, the sciences, culture, and media and communication. With its unique mandate, UNESCO also has this added value of having cultural diversity and a truly global, universal perspective at its heart. For instance, in December 2018, UNESCO organized one of the first series of high-level fora on AI in Africa, in Bengueria, Morocco. One of the key takeaways was that AI system can be adapted to and developed in local contexts, and thus be tools for empowerment and self-determined development. So with the concept of empowerment in mind, I will now ask Nico, and I'll do the first round of targeted questions, and then we'll move on and do one sentence of conclusion. So Nico, you're co-founder and director of the Future Society, a global think tank which implements concrete projects like the Global Governance on AI Roundtable that translate principles into practice. What, in your experience, is the role of these kinds of society-led initiatives going forward in ensuring an ethical and human-centered AI?
In one word, leapfrogging governance. The role of this kind of new generation think tanks that my organization is trying to be is to complement existing technocracies who are failing so far at delivering appropriate ways of governance because it's too complex, because they are vested interests and legitimate vested interests. Not all vested interests are legitimate. So what we're trying to do is do a simple thing, which is first bring them together. And that's the spirit behind the Global Governance of AI Forum, having brought together, let's say, UNESCO and OECD and many others around a common platform with a common set of themes is something that is very important. Second is putting research and action into one vessel. Thank you. Putting research and action into one vessel And third is mobilizing methodologies of, and tools of collective intelligence, which are not necessarily used naturally in such a setting, for example. And let me give you a practical example. Global Governance AI Forum last time in Dubai. We designed, for example, with the support of IEEE, a session that brought together COMEST and IEEE around discussing new ways of intersecting classical ethics, engineering ethics, and bioethics, which for us is essential if we are to advance new and innovative solutions to govern the rise of AI. Why? Because big data-driven, machine learning-centric AI systems are increasingly black boxes. These black boxes call for new types of solutions. Well, bioethics is an area where the management of complex black boxes, or bodies, or brains, have been at the core of the managerial table for a long time. So for us, acting as a convener, bringing, as an example, COMEST and IEEE around a conversation which had never been led so far was an element to help and advance under the aegis of the World Government Summit, a new solution, a new attempt to look at problems, complex problems, in an innovative fashion.
Thank you. Amandip, in the final report of the high-level panel on digital cooperation, the age of digital interdependence, 5 sets of recommendations are made. Can you tell us about these recommendations and their relevance with regards to ensuring the development and deployment of human-centered and ethical AI based on shared principles?
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. So this is the report that the UNSG's high-level panel turned in this summer. If those 5 recommendations are looked at together, they span the entire set of concerns around development. This is a big concern in the global south. People don't want to miss out on the opportunity, the digitalization, AI opportunity to solve long-standing problems, health, agriculture, and many more. The other is the aspect of inclusiveness, institutional, human capacity, and driving development and growth in an inclusive way. And of course, there are important concerns around human rights, human agency. So not just protection of the rights as we know it, but agency over the development and deployment of these technologies. One thing I want to say, and looking back at the previous panel, is if the principles-related exercise is too easy, then it's not what we need. The discovery of principles has to be driven by practice. It has to relate to the action on the ground. So if it is too abstract, then it's not going to serve the problem. Everyone around the globe will agree that AI should be human-centric, it should be fair, but when it actually comes down to practice, then we all go our separate ways. So the way to link principles to practice, in my view, based on the experience of the UNSG's high-level panel, is to actually let the practice drive the governance. So it has to be iterative governance. It has to be linked to concrete problem solving. That's also the way to connect with the youth, because they will only get energized. Look at the climate change issue, for example, if you give them global challenges to solve, if you treat them as adults with agency over their world.
Thank you. Adriana, as a young professional, you are positioned to know how important it is to have the necessary digital and AI literacy skills in order not only to understand, but also engage with AI and be part of its ethical development. So in your opinion, what skills and knowledge and tools are needed to ensure that you're well equipped to enter this new era?
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, as I'm just finishing my transition from school to the labor market, I agree that it's extremely important to empower young people with the right package that would allow them to face the uncertainties that AI are going to bring to the society as well as to the labor market. So not only to work with AI, but also to live with AI. And to have a future-facing curriculum, we have to rethink core linguistic, mathematical, technical literacies that then can be combined in a digital and AI literacy that will empower the youth. So while it's extremely important to accelerate the learning of statistics, maybe coding for a very young age, I would like to stress that this learning should never come at the expense of arts and humanities, which are going to become more, no less important in the face of the risk of automatization. So if there will be to be a 21st century curriculum, this curriculum has to move from the knowledge gathering structure that we are having today towards a mix that still includes knowledge. It's still important for young people to learn, to understand the world, but we need the skills that teach young people how to be critical in the face of this information that they're gathering. Thirdly, it's very important to build character for young people to know how to engage into society. And fourth, and maybe the most important, will be to have the right mentality of growth, a meta-learning or so-called lifelong learning that will allow young people, and maybe not so young people, to adapt, reflect, and constantly reinvent themselves into the face of those uncertainties and volatilities that AI are going to bring.
Thank you. Peter Paul Comest, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, published a preliminary study on the ethical dimensions of AI in the field of UNESCO's mandate. What are some of the most pressing ethical issues in the field of UNESCO mandate concerning AI? And what needs to be done in practice to address them?
That's a lot of questions to answer in 2 minutes, but I will try. Now, I think the key point that we try to make is that AI is at the heart of the mission of UNESCO. AI is about the mind, is about how we think, how we understand the world. And that's actually what UNESCO is all about. Education, science, culture, communication, it's all workings of the mind. So if AI works there, then we need to understand what's at stake there. So we didn't try right away to formulate a number of principles. I even heard of my own students doing bingo principles. When they hear them, they count them on we have again a form of transparency or accountability. That's not what we try. We try to understand what happens to education. How can we keep up something like critical thinking in education? And how can we prepare students for a job market where machines might take over jobs? In culture, for us, it's diversity. How do we keep up diversity of languages in an era of machine translation? Cultural diversity in an era where Spotify and Netflix determine what we watch, what we listen to. In the field of science, for us, it's about understanding the world and about new forms of scientific understanding, but also the decision-making that we do on the basis of science. Can we still take some form of responsibility for the choices that we make? And in communication, disinformation might take on a new form, and journalism actually might change a lot. And then there's a number of, you could say, global ethical issues that we really think are very important. Africa, how can we ensure that the interest and the perspective of African countries are really at the center of the discussion, that the data sets are not trained only with Western examples, as you showed in your introduction, but are worldwide. Gender, new forms of gender inclusion, exclusion, sustainability, peace. And that there's so many things that are at stake for AI that we believe UNESCO should take the lead. It's basically the only place in the world where we can have a perspective where the entire world is around the table to discuss this. This is the place where we can make choices and we can work towards a recommendation.
Thank you. Eva-Marie, you're leading the Center of Excellence for Data Science at IBM MEA and implementing sustainable, large-scale AI projects globally. Oftentimes in conversation it is said that the regulatory and ethical frameworks must catch up to the speed at which technology is being developed and the private sector is innovating and implementing. In your opinion, what needs to be done to ensure that standard-setting processes keep up to speed with private sector innovation? In practice, what can be learned from IBM as it concerns scaling up real-life solutions, harnessing AI for sustainable development?
I think what you described is what we know as a pacing problem. So normally when we develop technology, we don't really know what impact it will have one day on society. Once we see the impact, it's often too late to actually act on it, to make it stop, to switch off the internet or whatever, and to redirect the direction. And I think with working in all these groups that are talking about AI ethics and so on, I often see a lack of industry in there. I see a lot of policymakers, a lot of politicians, but not enough people who actually have developed the solutions, who have experience in what not to do, who have done it wrong and have a battle scars. And also businesses often don't understand the value of actually being ethical, the incentive they get, and actually the risk of not being ethical. And there is a business value and a business interest that we really have to make sure the industry understands and why they should be at these tables.
Thank you. Nico, we talked a lot about the importance of multi-stakeholder involvement in not only developing principles, but translating them into practice at regional and national levels. What is the Future Society doing to ensure multi-stakeholder engagement in this field?
Well, we're trying to deliver a set of methodologies and tools under this AI Civic Forum that Professor Diak mentioned, that we are launching with Mila, that hopefully will help UNESCO advance its process to adopt these shared AI ethics principles. And I guess what is a bit different is the methodology. We're trying to bring together to engineer the shift from multi to omni-stakeholder, meaning involving citizens. We're trying, as Marc-Antoine said, to create toolkits so as to educate people, to empower people to understand for themselves what is AI, what it is about, so that afterwards, in that process, they can be brought into the conversation and join and help craft these principles. This is neither an attack on the industry, nor an attack on science, nor an attack on expertise in general. If the revolution of AI is so impactful, so consequential, and so systematically complex, either we do that or we run the risk of creating illegitimate governance frameworks. So what we're trying to do here is engineer new methodologies to advance new forms of processes of the governance of AI in a way that really tries to reach deep and far in the global north, in the global south, and in a way that engineers a trans-civilizational conversation. We don't need an Africa-only conversation. We need it, mind you. We don't need a Europe-only conversation. We need it, mindly. But we need, for example, a Euro-Africa, a Euro-American, a Middle East, Asian conversations. That's called the trans-civilizational, that's called the global, and such conversation is not easy to deliver. We may fail. We may under-deliver, but we believe that now it's time to start a conversation. Otherwise, we will not get to the stage where we'll have a global debate which delivers on the complexity and intricacies of the opportunities and the challenges of the rise of AI.
Thank you. So, Amandip, the report of the high-level panel underlines that the immense power and value of data in the modern economy can and must be harnessed to meet the SDGs, but this will require new models of collaboration. So from your perspective, what do these new models of collaboration look like in practice?
So this is, I think, the most powerful way to turn principles into practice. These new models of collaboration that create these digital commons for the future, that create the global public goods that flatten the playing field for everyone, that allow social and economic innovation to scale. So I'm currently involved with creating a multi-stakeholder initiative called the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaborative. So in the area of universal health coverage, how do you put together data, AI algorithmic expertise, and other ways of using the digital opportunity at the service of the UHC goals? So this is the best way to bring principles to practice. And the UNSG's panel underlined this point in its very first set of recommendations, that you need to go beyond connectivity, you just need to go beyond plugging everyone to the internet to create inclusive demand for digitally enabled services in transformative areas like finance, health, climate change, and agriculture. And this cannot only be an exercise in building technology, it has to be, as Nico pointed out, a governance exercise as well. Common rails and guardrails, both to allow this to happen without violating any of the principles that we hold dear.
Adriana, you're currently doing research on AI and modern slavery, but also actively part of the work of the Global Data Commons and AI Commons. Can you tell us more about these initiatives and how are they based on translating ethical principles of AI into practice, What are lessons learned from these initiatives as it concerns the future of multilateral cooperation?
Sure. So I started my research being interested mainly on how we can accelerate the eradication of modern slavery. I was looking at the role of the private sector in this and was interested in what big corporations are doing to eliminate slavery in their supply chain. As a social scientist, I find it the mind of gold when I figure out there is a data set of over 14,000 reports that businesses have been publishing saying this is my supply chain and this is how I assure that slavery doesn't exist in my supply chain. Now, reading each of these reports by one and benchmarking by heart will have taken a very long time. But again, talking about this digital package that, and literacy that I described, I had to step aside and teach myself how to code and how to employ some of the machine learning tools that exist out there. And now I can do this analysis in a couple of minutes when it's done correctly. So reflecting back on this experience, I realized, well, surely AI possesses many challenges to the society, being such a complex tool. And it also has the possibility of being misused. But there is also a risk of misusing AI, meaning we do not take full advantage of how AI can help accelerate the development of the world. So here I am today working in initiatives such as the Global Data Commons and AI Commons, two projects, extremely multi-stakeholders and interdisciplinary that brings together some of the brightest minds on AI research, philosophy, law, but also representatives of international organizations, national governments, private sector, NGOs, civil society, sitting together at a round table discussing how can we leverage our resources and these tools of AI to make sure we accelerate and hopefully meet the Agenda 2030 of the SDGs. So if there will be a lesson to learn is that we need this interdisciplinary lens when we analyze how to transform these ethical principles into practice and how to assure that when we evaluate and assess the AI impact on society, we also evaluate and assess with this interdisciplinary approach the impact that we would like AI to have on society, for it to be inclusive, representative, not discriminatory, but also how we assure we use AI its full potential for social good.
Thank you. Peter Powell, in a couple of days, UNESCO General Conference will consider whether or not to adopt a process that will lead to standard setting in the field of the ethics of AI. Why, in your opinion, is that important?
It's extremely important, I think. It's important because there is no other place in the world where we could possibly do this. AI has a global impact. I like to compare it to earlier technologies like writing or the printing press that also had a lot of impact on how we think, how we understand the world. A global impact, right? And there is only one place in the world where we can bring the whole world around the table to discuss the ethics of it, and that is this organization. And then the ambition to arrive at a recommendation is extremely important because a recommendation is not just a nice document, it's the basis for regulation. It's a unique opportunity we have as the world to come with a global framework for regulating such an important new technology. And the current discussion that you see is really dominated by the North, you could say. It's often framed even as a competition between the East and the West, with the EU in the middle, and the third way, as it's often called. The South is completely absent in that picture, which I think is a very bad thing. So we really need to ensure that the entire globe is represented, has a place in this discussion, that we avoid biases, we avoid exclusion of parts of the world. And I think this organization is the place where we can do this. And that also means that it's not just an interesting thing to do. Regulation is quite important. It's maybe the cornerstone of everything. If we as nations cannot organize it, who could it? So yes, I really, really hope that in a few days from now, we will make a decision to write a recommendation.
Thank you. Eva-Marie, in your opinion, what needs to be done in order to ensure further public-private sector partnerships in order to translate principles into practice in the field of AI?
I think it's really important to involve the industry right from the beginning, to not just develop guidelines and then ask industry to implement them, but really have them there from day one and say, what is your take on it? How would you implement it? What does it mean in practice right from the start? And I think industry itself has to make a shift in understanding how important ethics actually becomes as a topic for corporations. And I think that's a wonderful place we are in at the moment in the world, because the whole discussion about AI actually opened up the world to understand how important ethics are again. Where do we want to go as a society, as a world on total? Ethics is completely different in different regions, and that's why I completely agree the risk of not having the Southern Hemisphere or certain countries, areas or whatever, being there as well, having their voice in it. Is so important because it means different ethics. And if you cannot develop something and then ask somebody to adopt it without them having their input right at the beginning. I also think that ethics has to become a mandatory subject at universities for everyone who's studying a science, to be aware of these issues. If you are developing a team, if you're leading a team and developing products, make sure they're ethical. And there is a risk, and there is a business risk of getting it wrong. And I think industry really needs to understand that. And I think slowly we're getting there. But building proper committees, building boards that are very diverse. They're diverse from academic, politics, from different regions and so on, and making everyone accountable in it. I think that is the best way forward. And I think that's why initiatives like this are so important for us to actually make sure that everyone is aligned on where we want to go as a world.
Thank you. I would now like to turn to all the experts on the panel and ask them to conclude in 1 minute, if possible, and to answer to these questions. So from your perspective, what needs to be done to ensure that standard-setting processes and instruments in the field of AI have a concrete impact in practice on the ground? What needs to be done? Yes.
Well, I'll steal the word from my dear friend, Ambassador Amandip Gill, who I think nailed it at the beginning. It's really engineering a pendulum, moving from principles to practice and backwards. It's engineering a virtuous feedback loop. And as UNESCO, we hope will embark into the definition of a standard setting instrument. I hope, obviously, that we need to move into omni-stakeholderism, but in so doing, bake at the center of the quest for these principles a series of use cases, of reference cases, and select them in a way that is diverse enough to make sense industrially, technologically, ethically, legally, commercially, so that when thereafter they translate into principle, they embark something that reflects the world with its challenges and opportunities, and then find in the way to govern this standard setting process precisely a process to engineer a virtuous, continuous feedback loop between principles and practice. That's, in my view, what is the soon to become state of the art to leapfrog the governance of ethics in AI.
So practice makes perfect in AI governance. And I think, Edwina, you started a reflection around misuse. So I call this the 3 M's problem. There is the misuse problem. We have to fix that. There's the misuse problem, which a lot of people in the global south want to focus on. And then there is the missing data problem. So there are huge areas, for example, registration of deaths, where we don't have the right data to drive AI solutions. We don't have the high quality data sets that are needed. So we need to fix those 3 M's, and we need to engage the youth. If this is about, this panel's been about the youth, so we need to engage the youth who are more connected and more at ease with digital technologies than any other generation before. We need to connect them to solving these challenges, the global challenges around the SDGs. That's the best way to get the governance right. That's the best way to demonstrate our confidence in the younger generation, rather than leaving them with a lot of abstract principles without a connection with practice and without a connection with their own agency over these problems.
Well, I would like to start by saying thank you for having us here today representing the youth. I think that if we want the standard setting processes and instruments to have concrete impact on the ground, I'll leverage some of the ideas that I heard today, omni-stakeholders, and maybe young Africa. We have a population boom that we are facing in the South, and we have an opportunity to start thinking how we can steer it towards a demographic dividend. But let's not think about it only as an economic concept, but let's think about how we can leverage this segment of population, the young people, to empower, train them, and then leverage their voices in the design of the principle and as actors in the implementation. Young people are active members of society, some of us already members of the labor market. We need the voice at the table, such as today, which is a great start, but in fact we need better representation in the design and implementation of ethical principles and transformation to practice. Thank you.
I think the most important thing to do is to make the ethics actionable, to make sure that we don't stick to a number of principles that we can agree upon. It's about how we bring them to the real world. And I think there are at least 3 ways in which we could make them actionable. First of all, to connect the ethics to design. There are a lot of approaches on that, value-sensitive design, ethically aligned design, design for values, etc. We should really work on that also at a global scale. Then next to design there is use, empowering users, empowering citizens, making them aware, making them understand AI and their ethical implications, as you so nicely said, Nick. And then third, of course, there's the level of implementation, regulation by governments. And that could also not only be about the implementation of AI in a society, but also about ways to empower users and also the demands we could put on the ethics of the design. For UNESCO, the mind is the focus of attention to work towards peace. If peace can start somewhere, it's in the minds of people. The mind is now in our hands, in the hands of AI. So we should take good forms of responsibility for artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think it's really important to bring everyone in there together to make sure that the policymakers, the ethic boards and so on, they are diverse enough. They consider the youth, they consider the different regions, and they consider the people who are actually having to implement it one day, the developer. For that, I think the developer need to be more aware of that. They need to have the education in that right from the beginning. And by bringing them together, it makes sure that whatever is developed is actually actionable, is actually implementable. It's not just a concept, but it actually leads to concrete action. And we have a large research team that is actually just focused on this is the policy, how do we actually translate it into products? And that is a completely different challenge. And I think having these people on board right from the beginning and saying, okay, this is the theory and this is what it actually means on everyday product development, on everyday actions, on everyday services we provide. That is a big gap we actually have to make sure we close, and not just for one region, but for every region around the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Iman, and to all of the panelists for your great contributions. I'd just like to highlight that in both panel 1 and panel 2, so developing principles and from principles to practice, a lot of keywords came up on a repeated level. So the need for inclusiveness, the need for transparency, the need for explainability, for accountability, for a design-based approach and multi-stakeholder approach to development of ethical principles and practices with regards to artificial intelligence. And before passing the floor for brief closing remarks to my colleague Cedric Wackholtz, who is chief of the section for ICTs for Education, Science and Culture, I would just like to take this opportunity to underline, since we are at the General Conference, that in 2015, at the General Conference, member states adopted an approach which is the Internet Universality Framework approach, which underlines that the development of Internet and Internet governance should be rights-based, open, accessible, and multi-stakeholder. And this is what at UNESCO we call the Rome approach. And we are currently looking right now at how to adopt this approach to our work more broadly on digital transformation, including artificial intelligence. We have a publication that will be coming out shortly about this, and we invite you, since all of our publications are open access, to download and circulate this thought piece, which reflects more broadly on UNESCO's work with regards to digital transformation, specifically taking these 4 entry points at its heart. So rights, Human rights that exist offline exist online. Openness, accessibility, and multi-stakeholderism. And on that note, I'd like to pass the floor to Cedric Wachholz to close this side event, and thank you all for being with us here today.
Thank you, Sasha. I will be brief in closing, and I would like to highlight 4 takeaways from today's discussion on the side event of Youth Voices and the Future of Artificial Intelligence. First is really the urgency to move together forward, to address the risks and to harness the opportunities and to overcome the challenges, or in Amandeep's words, to make to the 3 M's, the misuse, and the missing data is one of the challenges. In panel 1, I retain the need to build on the existence and the existing framework and on the existing experiences, which the panel 1 highlighted from OECD, but also from AU, from Marc-Antoine in Canada, but also from IEEE. And of course, of a multi-stakeholder approach, which is inclusive in terms of gender, in terms of generations, and also in geography. In panel 2, where we tried to highlight to translate the international principles into practice to harness AI for the SDGs. Of course, governance was really a central discussion point in terms of leapfrogging governance on one hand, but also let practice drive governance as one approach and one idea. Inclusiveness was very much underlined, the need to build capacity to empower, and different models of cooperation were also discussed. In going forward, my 4th point, of course, we will have the SHS Commission on 21st December, the decision on a standard setting document and instrument. And of course, UNESCO will continue to develop innovative AI models, to be a laboratory of ideas, to develop capacities, to provide policy advice too. And of course, we look forward to reinforce our cooperation with all of you and all of the actors here. And we will have also a lot of series of discussions and capacity developments. And the next one will be actually the Regional Forum on Artificial Intelligence in Latin America and the Caribbean with NIC.br, with CITIC.br, but with the Brazilian government through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation and Communications. This will be in Sao Paulo on 12th and 13th December of this year. Sasha just mentioned also an upcoming Rome publication, but I would like to close by thanking the panelists first for their unwavering support they expressed, but also the entire AI team which was here. You might have, those who know, seen the different assistant director generals who were present from social sciences, from Africa, from communication. So it had highest level support, but also many program specialists in the back worked together from the Africa department, from gender, from cabinet. And then also Sasha Rubel, whom you all know, who has organized it very smoothly and greatly, and the CI team. And of course, particularly also our moderators, the youth, and who will live the entire impact of the AI revolution in the future, but also we showed, I think, well, that we are not only working for youth, but with youth. And in this spirit, I thank you again and wish you a very good General Conference continuation. See you on 21st in November in the SHS Commission and the Standard Setting. Thanks.